Hello and welcome to the Strode Politics and Economics podcast. Today we're going to be doing sort of a capitalism versus communism debate. In this side we have Khai representing capitalism.
Hello.
And in this side we have Abi representing communism.
Hello.
So we're going to go over a few points, starting with, I think we're going to start with how both systems sort of tackle competition. I think Khai is going to start us off with that.
Yep. I think capitalism is great when it comes to competition, as lowering consumer costs when it comes to luxury and non-luxury products in an economy is a great thing that capitalism does. The more competition within the economy, companies will compete to attract a wider base of consumers from the poor to the rich, and the more competition there is, the more advanced your economy actually becomes, because the people working on lower income jobs will be able to afford more and more luxury products, which overall boosts the economy as well. So a fully fledged working competition system allows consumers to access products where monopolies would not allow them to do due to higher prices. And I think the free market naturally ends up being a competitive state due to innovation and increased amounts of companies starting up with stuff like government grants, loans from banks, etc., becoming more readily available in the modern world due to the increase in banking systems and the allowance of the British government giving out business grants and loans, increasing the overall competition within the British economy.
Okay, so Abi, what would be your rebuttal to what Khai just said, I guess? What would be your point for communism and
communism purposefully tries to eliminate competition, which is completely different from capitalism. So they, Russia and the USSR would have just had one shop for bread and nothing else. But this is it's the only communism cannot compete with capitalism when it comes to competition. However, a country like China is incredibly competitive in the international market because they purposefully depreciated their currency, which is illegal, but it's when communism cannot compete with capitalism on competition, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a disadvantage of communism, because when you've got a centrally controlled economy, you can purposefully keep prices low.
I think with that is that you kind of stifle competition purposely or accidentally, that which also stifles innovation. We saw mainly the USSR's innovation being military ones due to the Cold War, and we see Western countries like the US and the UK developing coloured television, while the US and China really didn't have many TVs around, let alone coloured TVs, which I think proves why capitalism is best at providing consumer supply at an innovative and competitive rate.
also, do you have anything else you want to say on the topic of competition?
No, I am not a communist, so I actually agree with Khai and the fact that capitalism creating competition is a good thing for the consumer.
So what would be your points on how both systems sort of tackle the subject of employment? Abi, would you like to start off with this one?
Well, communism is very good in the fact that if there is unemployment, the government can just create jobs and give them to people, which means unemployment is generally very, very low in communist countries, which is a benefit, because if you're working, you're earning money, and therefore you can buy stuff. And if you've got the controlled prices by which are controlled by the government, then in theory you should be able to afford all of the basic necessities. And the goal of communism is to eventually just eliminate the concept of money, and go back to just doing your bit for the good of everyone. Although that requires a lot of altruism, which is generally quite difficult to find in the 21st century, not gonna lie.
So Khai, would you like to talk of the subject of employment with capitalism?
I think unemployment is Capitalism has an interesting way of dealing with unemployment because unemployment will constantly fluctuate, which I think is actually necessary. Because low employment, so high unemployment, generally actually fuels innovation as people in the market see plenty of workers unemployed and free in the market, reducing wages, which makes it easier to start a business. So I think in terms of a communist way of looking at unemployment, having a full employment or near full employment would actually be quite negative for an economy, because natural trade unions would be able to bargain for higher and higher wages as there is a lack of labour competition in the market, causing higher unemployment and high expenditure for the government. I mean, if you remove the idea of currency completely, I guess full employment could work in terms of it not causing inflation, but when you get a drastic economic shock such as war, I guess full employment under communism could actually be negative, because so many industries and companies will be hurt due to a mobilization or a draft. I think it could end up quite negative for the communist economy to have full or near full employment.
So any sort of points you have more on the topic of employment, any sort of rebuttals or, back and forth?
Don't think so. I think communism is, in theory, it's wonderful. In practice, it's not great. I know I'm not really selling it here, but this is completely theoretical. In theory, it's a brilliant idea. We find some perfectly altruistic people to set up a communist country on one of those tiny uninhabited islands in the middle of the Atlantic, and you've got the communist utopia. But I agree in the fact that some unemployment is necessary, because it means that you can create. There are jobs that our generation will be doing 20 years in the future that don't exist yet. So unemployment is necessary because it drives innovation in not just creating more jobs of what we currently have, but entirely new jobs.
So how would you two speak on sort of solving, as it were, the economic problem? How would you two sort of speak on that?
So I think capitalism is a natural way of dealing with the economic problem, of course, it being how to share economic resources that are finite. And from a communist perspective, it isn't great how we do it now. The rich get what they want while the poor don't. However, I think the ability to compete for the rich will compete for resources just like the poor, and the rich will often use those resources in terms of a building business kind of aspect. So in terms of the finite resource of labour, or the finite resource of oil or something like that, will create economic growth and make everyone, including the poor, slightly richer. As when you compete for these finite resources, capitalism allows a market drive towards the allocation of these resources. So whether in capitalism you allocate them to who buys them, which I believe is maybe not the fairest system but the most efficient, as it allows the market to shift, be it with government intervention or not, such as we're seeing now the energy crisis in the UK. It's based on who can buy the energy, essentially, because the government has intervened and capped the price of electricity, which is actually negatively impacting the ability to obtain these finite resources such as electricity, gas, wind power, everything like that is dramatically hampered by a government cap, which is essentially a protectionist communist ideal. And I think that free market capitalism will share these resources in an adequate way to meet market demands, because at the end of the day, if the people want it, then it will be supplied, and those finite resources will be supplied to those who pay the most for it.
On to you, Abby.
So capitalism is great in the fact that it is an efficient way of distributing resources, but it's not very fair. It's not fair when you've got some people who have to choose between heating their houses or eating. That's just not fair. So communism is great in the fact that it will, as evenly as possible, distribute the resources that it has, which puts everyone on an equal footing, which, you know, capitalism goes on and on about being on an equal footing to create equal opportunity. But when you don't actually have an equal playing field for the rich and the poor, then how can those people have equal opportunity? So in stuff like unpaid internships, that's not available to someone who is poor. Whereas if there is, you know, no such thing as rich and poor, then equal opportunity, such as doing internships, might be available to people of all backgrounds.
So how would you guys, I guess that would be a good lead on to, how would you guys speak about how both systems sort of tackle the subject of inequality?
So inequality is absolutely rampant in almost every country in the world. I can't think of an example where it isn't. And this is true under both capitalism and communism. But capitalism exacerbates the problem in the fact that when you have competition, you will end up with a monopoly whether you like it or not. So Amazon has almost a complete monopoly on delivery services. So especially in America, delivery companies such as UPS or FedEx are nowhere near as effective as Amazon, and this gives Amazon effectively a monopoly, which is it's a problem because it means prices will go up, and this will see inequality rise. And whilst you might see real GDP growth in America, it will often just be the rich getting richer rather than everyone getting richer together.
There's not too many ways to argue with that. When it comes to capitalism, there will be a poor and there will be a rich. That will always occur. That's how capitalism is built. And I think at some point you have to ask, is inequality that bad in terms of a developed country like the UK? I'm not on about an undeveloped or developing country where poverty means deep starvation, homelessness, etc. Of course, in the UK we do have a skyrocketing homeless rate and poverty rate, but the market, I believe, will fix itself. In the UK, we class poverty as what someone in a third world country would define as luxury and wealth. The fact that the UK has poor people in the UK do have homes, do have access to food stamps, access to charities which keep them fed, like food banks. Obviously, it's not ideal. I honestly don't care about unemployment unless there is poverty and people struggling, because that should never occur. But this always will occur during times of economic, downturn, and like we have greatly seen during COVID. But when it comes to inequality, it will always be there. There's no way to solve it, but there will be ways to lessen it in terms of education, in terms of the council housing system that we currently have in the UK, in terms of benefits which we have in the UK. But we have to ask ourselves sometimes, we know inequality exists, but when do we take the fact that the poor still have homes and access to food, when do we call that poverty, and when do we call that, just basic capitalistic inequality?
So next, I would like you guys to sort of speak on, I guess, the idea of the welfare state and how systems how these two systems tackle it. Abby, would you like to start us off with this one?
Yeah, so that leads quite nicely on from inequality in the fact that we do have a welfare state in the UK, but we don't have enough of it. In the 1940s, after World War II, the Labour government of Clement Attlee is considered the best government we have ever had, and they created the welfare state, they created the NHS, which are things that are essential for people to live. Without the NHS, my mum probably wouldn't be alive. And this, the welfare state is wonderful, and when you have a communist country, that means that the entire country is the welfare state. The idea is that no one is poor, but no one is rich, which is essentially just everyone is the welfare state. We also don't have enough council houses, by the way, which I think, it's necessary to keep people alive, which is, generally considered to be a good thing. So whereas something like socialism in the 1940s has made this country better in terms of how we support poor people, a communist country can take that one step further and support everyone, whether they are, no matter who they are.
Whether they like it or not. No.
Yeah.
So can we lead on to you with giving your sort of rebuttal about capitalism?
I think the welfare state is incredibly important, and we can't really exist without it. But there is a limit to it. There has to be a limit to it. We can't allow people to live luxury lives from benefits, because that does lead to a underclass, essentially, those who decide this is enough for me, I'm not going to work. It does sound very unkind and mean and, meanie party conservative. But when we have 950,000 vacancies in the UK, a severe shortage of haulage drivers, causing lack of transportabilities for food and clothing to shops, and we have 2.6 million people currently applying and living on benefits. And I'm obviously not saying that everyone in there has to work, because obviously there's people who cannot work, which is fair enough. But when there's 2.6 million people unemployed and on benefits, and 1 million vacancies virtually, and severe shortages due to that, when is the point do we realise that we are bankrupting ourselves paying for a welfare state? Including furlough, Britain has taken £500 billion of debt in the past year and a half, which is going to come back and bite us. We need to get the economy moving. We need to ensure that welfare is only going to those who cannot work or those who don't have jobs available near them. Other than that, NHS is obviously incredibly important, and I do believe in the NHS should be maintained and strengthened. And I'm not I personally do not like private healthcare, but a plus of it would lead to far more innovation in the pharmaceutical health market. If the healthcare system was privatised, we might even have a cure for stuff like cancer or wildly spread diseases, as companies would realise they could make a profit from it, so they would work towards it, which would incentivise companies towards making better healthcare, better pharmaceuticals, to ensure that those purchasing them, the amount of people purchasing them would expand and grow to cover all the people with illnesses and disabilities.
So how would you guys speak on the idea of command control economy, our last point today? How would you speak on that? I don't know who wants to start with
It's
that.
a deeply communist ideal, so I'll let Abby. I'll let Abby take
Start
this
again.
one, and then I'll try and counter it a little bit.
So the positives of command control economies are, as Kai was talking about, profit incentive to innovate. But there are some necessary goods where there isn't much profit incentive, which is a positive for a command control economy because they can direct scientists into research and development on this particular product that might be needed. Whereas in capitalism, it might never get made if there's little to no chance of it producing profit for the companies that are designing it. They also have much more control over the currency of their country, so they're much better equipped to deal with things like inflation, as well as they can control, specifically, they can control how their workers, just the people in general, are paid, and therefore they can control how companies run. When everything is centrally controlled, it's better. It's hard if command control economies do tend to have a weakness for corruption, which is why communism is always better in theory than in practice, because you will always have corrupt officials in government. But if you were to have a command control economy of completely altruistic people with the best interests of the country at heart, then it would likely be an effective system.
So we'll take it from the theoretical, because this whole thing is meant to be a theoretical one. So I'll take it as the command control economy is completely run by altruists, and not even mention Venezuela. The issue with command control economies is that it is a direct prohibition to innovation. Innovation comes not from the idea that you want to make something better, but the accidental realization that it could be better. And there's little incentive to do that in command control economies. And when you inflate the bureaucracy and massively overdo control on economies, you will have a lack of able administrators, because not only will you have to have basic managers employed by the government in the businesses, but you also have to have bureaucratic administrators for each and every business. And the government being able to control wages, I think, is very, very dangerous. I'm not on about the minimum wage or anything, but it could lead to lesser economic freedom. Those who comply and support the government more seeing higher wages. We did see this during the Soviet Union. They're not the best example of command control because they didn't do it very well, but you see that dissidents and people who do not agree with the government end up, because the government completely controls employment, see them unemployed. And I think capitalism is good in the way that it doesn't command control the economy in terms of free markets. Obviously, they somewhat do in protectionist, but I think capitalism is better in the way that it allows the free market to maneuver itself to not only solve the economic problem, but maintain stable inflation and employment, which I guess communism would be better in the way that the government could purely hire more people and expand the production base. But if you're a single command control economy and you base much of your production off what you see in your nation, I will bring up a little bit of Venezuela here, who was the modern example of a command control economy. It went absolutely amazingly when oil prices were high, but once it was dumped the market was dumped with oil by places like Saudi Arabia, the price crashed. So did the Venezuelan economy, purely because it didn't have the ability to innovate and become a mixed market. So the inflation ran rampant, and the economy essentially collapsed, because the one thing command and control economies were good at was completely outpaced by the ability. The command control economy is completely outpaced by free markets and its own ineptitude to changing up and diversifying the market and production base.
Well, thank you. I think those were our 5 points. Anything else we want to talk about today, or?
No, I think
I mean, Cuba's doing pretty well with the command control economy. They're not, not doing too
Although-
great on freedom of the press and stuff. But everyone gets a bag of rice a week, which, at least they don't starve.
yeah, that's I don't think that's but then where's the diversity? It's limited the amount of food, the types of food and political freedoms you get purely because people don't have a free say in their market. If they did, then perhaps Cuba could have democracy, but if the people do not have freedom in the market, then there is no democracy, there is no freedom, because any disagreement with the government, such as in Cuba, well, mainly older Cuba, I'm not sure about how, if they do it too much now, would see you just simply unemployed for disagreeing with the government.
Well, thank you very much for listening to this podcast. I think it's been really good. We've had some really good points come up. And anything else you guys want to say?
I think I'm done.
But yeah, thank you ever so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.